Can we have your attention, please? We are here today basically to celebrate the life of a great gentleman that many of us know very near and dear. And we have so many moments of history here at this meeting. Look around, I see former chairman, former commissioners, current chairman, current commissioners, staff, former staff of Jim Quello, Jim Quello's son and his wife, Kim. Grateful that you're here today to celebrate, what Tom Brokaw really described as the greatest generation, to have actually known somebody who is 95 years old, who is really the hallmark of the greatest generation in terms of the number of years that he served in the theater of war, World War II, and the wars of the FCC, so to speak. But just grateful that we're here today to celebrate this remarkable, remarkable man and his life. And to begin, I would like to welcome the current chairman of the FCC, Chairman Julius Janikowski.
Thank you, everyone. Brian, thank you. Thank you very much. It's so great to see so many people here. So many familiar places. We had a legal advisor reunion a few minutes ago and changed some rules, but as in the old days, we agreed not to tell our bosses, and so you'll read about it in Com Daily. But it's just great that everyone is here for this wonderful occasion. We all know why you're here. As the Vice President said, this is a big deal. That Jim Quello would not have censored that joke. I see a number of my predecessors here, Reed Hunt, Chairman Reed Hunt, Michael Powell, Al Sykes, Dick Wiley. It's great to see you all here, and it's only a fraction of the chairman that Jim Quello served with, which is quite amazing. I see at least a couple of former commissioners here, Henry Rivera, Mimi Dawson. There may be others. I welcome you all. I think each of my current colleagues is here, Commissioner Copps and Commissioner Baker and Commissioner McDowell, and Commissioner Clyburn I think is here if she's in. Great, Commissioner Clyburn is here, terrific. Chairman Sykes, Dick, I think I mentioned Chairman Sykes. So your motion is not granted. A number of people worked very hard to put this event together, and I wanted to mention a few names. Carlin Walker and Don Harvey for their work on the photos around the room and other memorabilia. They're really worth looking at. Dan Oliver, Jeff Reardon, Steve Balderson, Cazette Ballesteros for the AV work. You're going to see just an outstanding video shortly. In fact, having seen a preview of the video, I now know the quote that inspired the nickname The Boss. Is this permanent? I always thought it was because the FCC was the New Jersey of federal agencies, but you'll see why for those of you who don't know. A few more thank yous. You'll see in the video that some of the people I've already thanked participate. They took their time, and it's led to a wonderful result. Others you'll see who I wanted to thank: Senator Inouye, Chairman Dingell, Chairman Markey, Chairman Fowler participated, Commissioners Rochelle Chong, Henry, you participated as well, so thank you all. Thanks very much to Brian Fonts and Pete Belvin for really driving this through, for reaching out to all of you, for making it happen and bringing this together. Thank you to Dick Quello for being here and your wife, and for sharing your dad with the FCC family for so many years. Today we celebrate Jim Quello, of course, as an eminent figure in FCC history, not because of the duration of his tenure, as impressive as that was, but because of the unique qualities of this man and his public service. I think another man who lived into his 90s, as of course we all will, Oliver Wendell Holmes, captured the essence of what made Jim Quello so special when he said the following: "Men do not quit playing because they grow old. They grow old because they quit playing." Jim Quello never quit playing. And for 23 and a half years, we at the FCC were fortunate to have him playing on this team. I remember the first time I met Jim Quello. I was working for Chairman Hunt. I was actually, no, I wasn't working for Chairman Hunt. Well, the first time I met him was when I was working for Chairman Hunt. But I was working for, to be Chairman Bill Kennard in the General Counsel's office. And that's where I started at the FCC, and I remember being in the General Counsel's office, reading the trade press, and observing the relationship that I was reading about between Reed Hunt and Jim Quello, a healthy, vibrant back and forth. And so when I very happily went to work for Reed Hunt, and this is all Blair's fault. I've now gotten my revenge. But Blair and Reed somehow convinced me to come work for them and put me on all of the issues that were the center of the big public fights. And I wasn't entirely sure what I was getting into, being thrust in the middle of those spicy issues. And I remember one day going over to meet with his staff, with Maureen, and we were talking about some hot issue. And in the middle of the meeting, someone came, I can't remember who, but pulled me out and said Commissioner Quello wanted to talk to me. And I'd never met him before. And I immediately became quite nervous. One, I was about to meet this iconic figure who disagreed very strongly with my boss. And two, this iconic figure was a war hero who knew how to use a gun. Actually, this week, in preparing for this, I learned something that fortunately I didn't know at the time, which is that he would occasionally bring a gun into the office. Didn't know that. And, I've been trying to think back and reflect on that conversation, and I don't remember a lot of the detail of that conversation. But I do remember being anxious going in to that wonderfully colored purple green office, and within seconds, my nervousness and anxieties had completely washed away. This was a person who, what I remember is, and I can't remember the words, but I remember the respect that he showed me, the friendliness with which he disagreed with me, because we did disagree on some things. I remember his wit, and I remember that this was a man of conviction who would fight for his beliefs, and who also understood the power of pragmatism and the importance ultimately of working on solutions to problems. And those characteristics, which I remember so clearly, defined his tenure at the FCC and enabled a real record of accomplishment. You all know this. In the 1980s, a major part of what led to the recent successful transition of digital television, helped secure the authority from Congress for spectrum auctions, oversaw the early implementation of the Cable Act, helped revitalize the agency, securing the Commission's first budget increase in years. Took on Howard Stern, who actually called in Senator Alphonse D'Amato for backup, and Jim Quello took him on too. Nobody ever accused Jim Quello of backing down from a tough fight, and more often than not, Jim Quello came out on top. A couple of months ago, I was honored to be in Poland as head of the U.S. delegation commemorating the 65th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, where the ashes of my great-grandmother and other members of my family reside. You might be asking, why am I talking about this? Well, on that occasion, I spent time thinking and spoke about the courageous soldiers. I'm reading from what I wrote at the time. We must remember the courageous soldiers who fought the Nazis and liberated the death camps, who risked their lives and sacrificed so much to save others, reminding us of the boundless human capacity for good. Well, of course, Jim Quello was one of those soldiers. He led the battalion that seized the SS College, Germany's West Point, in what was truly a fierce battle with some of the Nazis' best trained fighters. Some American tanks retreated under the heavy fire. Jim Quello kept moving forward and led our troops to victory on that day. He would also be one of the first American troops to arrive at the Dachau death camp immediately following its capture. He never forgot and spent real time over the course of his life bearing witness to the unspeakable acts that he saw and helping the world remember. And on behalf of so many, I'm personally grateful for that. We all remember Jim Quello for his remarkable service at our agency. Even if he had never served at the FCC, as you can see, he would have led a remarkable life. Even setting aside his military service, he was, of course, a successful broadcaster, a pillar of the Detroit community, and I didn't know this until working on in preparation for this, chairman of the Detroit Housing and Urban Renewal Commission. Pete's nodding her head. To borrow from Oliver Wendell Holmes again, life is action and passion. Therefore, it is required of a man that he should share the passion and action of the time at peril of being judged not to have lived. There is no doubt Jim Quello will be judged to have lived. He was certainly a man of action and passion for this agency and his staff, passion for tennis and lunches at the Palm, passion for the First Amendment, passion for so many colors, passion for our country, and most important, passion for his beloved wife Mary and his family. That's one way I'll remember Jim Quello. Another is the way that he wished. Upon Jim's induction to the Radio Hall of Fame in 1996, this is how Jim Quello ended his remarks. My final word, he said, I'd like my legacy to read, he never forgot where he came from. Jim Quello never forgot where he came from, and we will never forget him. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, we'd like to hear, like Jim, Interim Chairman Michael Copps, now Commissioner at the FCC. Commissioner.
I was standing out there a couple of minutes ago wondering or thinking, Jim may be watching this, I better be careful what I say, and then I thought a little more about it and thought he would say, right on, go to it. Jim was, for all of us, one of those folks right out of that old Reader's Digest, the most unforgettable character I've met series. Talk about unforgettable. I was having lunch with somebody just an hour or two ago, and they said, it's really strange, but I find myself thinking of Jim Quello very, very often, even now. And I do, too. I really like Jim, and though it may have taken him a little while, I'm glad he came to like me, too. No one was easier to know than Jim because he was always the same fellow. He wasn't much different when he left us than when he came here. Remember that old country song that was on the charts a year or two ago, All He's Ever Going to Be is Who He Always Was? That was Jim, his character constant through the passing years, his compass steady on due north, his friendship secure, even as presidents and congresses and FCCs and political ideologies came and went, as they often do in this unsteady city. Someone once said, what's the one word that best describes Jim? And if I had to pick that word, I think it would be grace. Jim was a man who moved with uncommon grace and ease through the passing years, and he passed through a lot of years. He adjusted to change, and he led change too. Here's a guy who was born before the first guns of World War I fired, and who lived through perhaps the most tumultuous century in history, but those values and virtues that he learned in Calumet, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and the courage and tenacity he showed on the battlefields of North Africa and Sicily and Italy and France were the same values he held on to through all the years. What courage that was, and as Hemingway said, courage is grace under pressure, going back to that word grace. And what courage it takes when you see the travail of Dachau or something like that to hold on to your basic values and to come back and to live those values. But he did that because he knew what he believed and he knew what he was fighting for. Jim brought his values and his grace home from war. As Julia said, went into broadcasting, became very successful, got involved in all sorts of civic enterprises, housing, veterans service, urban affairs. Put all of those experiences together, and it would probably be a life and a half for most of us, but Jim was just getting started on that 23 years as a commissioner at the FCC. Worked for 7 presidents of the United States. 7. Never one to sugarcoat his beliefs. His first confirmation hearing was a tad controversial. Lasted for 8 days. Then folks got to know him a little better and to appreciate the candor and the capacity of the man. So his 1984 confirmation took 15 minutes. Broadcasting and Cable described that hearing this way: soft as ice cream on a hot summer day. Can anyone think of 23 more formative years to be here at the FCC with the telecom and the media worlds just completely remade, the dawn of the digital age, all kinds of new services, the list goes on and on. Jim learned it all, mastered it all, and took leadership on many of those issues. He got to be chairman for a while, and we're still talking about those 11 months. Folks look back on it as kind of a golden age of communications at the Communications Commission. In fact, I know another short-term chairman who tried to bring the Quello openness to the current commission so that lines of communication are always open from top to bottom and from edge to edge all across our commission, and make sure that this is a place where there's an esprit de corps that brings us all together in pride of public service and a job well done, maybe an esprit de corps that traced back to Jim's leadership on the field of battle. Anyway, I knew where my playbook came from, and now we've got a permanent chairman who's reading from the same playbook, and we say thank you, Jim. Now, don't get me wrong, Jim and I weren't always exactly on the same page. I've been the recipient of some pretty straight talk from Gentleman Jim. I never took it personally because it wasn't intended that way. We could agree to disagree and still enjoy a good lunch, which we frequently did. But his straight talk never stopped, even at the end, and I mean the very end. On Friday evening before he died, I went out to visit him in his apartment. And he was at peace with himself, he was engaged, sense of humor intact, and we even talked some shop. About halfway through it, he said, "Now, cops, there's just one thing we disagree on." And then he launched into an observation or two about where we had differing perspectives on some of the media issues that were currently pending before the FCC. And finally he said, "Well, you're a good man. Just do what you think is right." I think that was Jim Quello, too. And I certainly never felt like I was being uniquely singled out for an occasional critical comment. Many of you have been there, too, correct? Anybody who hasn't, hold up your hand. I don't think Jim would have respected anybody who agreed with him 100% of the time. And as he told one gathering, "I'm delighted to be here. I think I voted against all of you at least once, probably twice." But to come through all of those years of tumult and change, 95 of them, to come through all of those transformations and controversies and shifting centers of power with your reputation and your values and your credibility and your integrity intact is quite an accomplishment. And in my book, there is no other professional accomplishment that comes even close to that. It's the best one of all. And through it all, he had that wonderful sense of humor and personal charm and joy of life and never taking himself too seriously. It was quite an act, except it was never an act. It was the real thing. Look around this room and you'll see one more thing that Jim Quello inspired. It's called loyalty. Loyalty is another virtue in shorter supply in this city than once it was. But the people here who worked with Jim and learned from him and mentored under him are folks truly blessed. And they returned Jim's loyalty to them with theirs to him, a loyalty that ran so very, very deep. He drew the best from these people because he gave them his best back. and he empowered them, and they loved him for it. I remarked when Jim passed that you can tell a lot about how a person lived by the way they die. And Jim Quello died with grace and with confidence and a calm spirit and a pride in a life well lived. And even at the end then, he was setting an example for us, and we won't see another like him. Let's celebrate today that we got to share time and friendship with him, and God rest his soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's, for everyone that's in this room, we all have our Quelloisms, and I'd like to, in that same thought, turn to our next speaker, Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you very much. It's truly a great honor to be able to take part in this, and first and foremost, I do want to express my sincere condolences to the Quello family for your loss. We in his larger FCC family have had the privilege of his wisdom, insight, and humor, which we'll get to later, for only 35 years, including his time as Chairman Emeritus. But you have known and loved him for much, much longer, and we want you to know that we miss him too very much. And even as we deal with our grief, however, it is impossible to avoid smiling and outright laughing when you think about Jim Quello. What an American story his life made. Now, we're about to watch a video reviewing the highlights of his amazing 95 years on this planet, so I won't belabor these details right now. But I can't resist marveling over the changes that Jim saw over his long lifetime and how often he was a key participant in them. He was born into a different world in April of 1914. In that year, the industry to which he devoted the first part of his life, commercial broadcasting, was still years away from becoming a reality. And his birth occurred just months before the start of the Great War, the one that did not end all wars, after all, but rather led to another one, which he fought a generation later. Jim did personify the best attributes of America's greatest generation. Prevailing over the hardships brought about by the Great Depression, without hesitation, he risked his own life in the struggle to defeat fascism in Europe during World War II. In peacetime, he helped build Michigan's broadcasting industry. And then at an age when most people start making serious retirement plans, Jim chose to serve his country once more on the FCC. And once he got here, Jim gave new and lively meaning to the phrase golden years. Keep in mind that he didn't start his FCC career until he was in his 60s. His street smart and savvy personality, coupled with a wicked and sometimes earthy sense of humor, was legendary. Yet, for all the news he made in the outside world, as we can see with some of these clippings that we're surrounded by, Jim may have been best known within, well, not these walls, but 1919 M Street, as a leader who liked, valued, and respected the FCC's terrific staff. As a young attorney new to communications law in the early 1990s, I first encountered the boss from afar as one of many who watched and grew to admire the collegiality and openness he brought to his role as acting chairman. And later, it was a true pleasure to get to know Jim during my own tenure here. He demonstrated his kindness and thoughtfulness by reaching out to mentor many of us who have entered these doors over the years. Jim extended that mentorship to a much wider range of Americans after he stepped down from the commission by helping to establish the Quello Center for Telecommunications Management and Law at Michigan State. Go Trojans. The Quello Center right now has several ongoing projects that I hope will help inform the Commission's future decision-making, including one on the relevance of broadcast ownership structure to the delivery of local news and information, and others designed to dig deeper into existing data sets to trace the effects of regulation on innovation and investment. But let's not talk policy right now. Of all the advice Jim gave directly to me, the best was the simplest, as was said earlier. Just do what you think is right. And I talked to him several times during a few tense moments I've had as a commissioner. And that was his advice. One of the cherished mementos in my office right now is a glossy picture taken just this past December 16th during one of, the last big Quello holiday party. It centers in the very center on a frail Jim, but with a beaming, brilliant smile. And he's surrounded by a bipartisan crowd of current and former commissioners. When I look at it, I'll remember what he taught me. He never allowed speeches about himself at that annual holiday party. So today is our opportunity to say what went unsaid for years. But better than that, let's let the man speak for himself. Jim never, ever could have been mistaken for a faceless and boring Washington bureaucrat. Some of his quips are now legendary. Well before the dawn of the internet, word of the latest Quelloism often sped through FCC-centric offices all over town. One oft-repeated quote came from his days as acting FCC chairman, when the agency was making headlines with its indecency enforcement actions against none other than Howard Stern. Because I'm not the colorful character that Jim was, and I don't want to get myself in too much trouble, I won't be repeating his words verbatim, but they won't be hard to find online if you don't already know what I'm talking about. Just search for the words Quello, Stern, 1993, and Big Bolt of Lightning, and reference to a certain body part will pop up. So. Other Quelloisms are memorable too, and here are a few of my favorites. There we go. On old age, he said, I watch X-rated movies backwards. At my age, I want people to put their clothes on and go home. When I first got the job, I was told to stick around until they name the building after you. There's an idea. When you become venerable, you get credit for virtues you never possessed. On communications policy and FCC decision-making, I do deregulation, but I don't do anarchy. The chairman is like a good cow. He gives great milk, but every once in a while he kicks over the bucket. I don't know if that person's in the room or not, but I'll move along. Boys, this is a tough decision, but it's not so bad. Nobody's shooting at us. That's a classic World War II generation quote. On lobbying. You know, if I can't eat their food and drink their booze and still vote against them, I shouldn't be in this job. Anyway, over the years, I think I must have voted against everyone in town, at least twice. And I think my favorite, on the press. The press was awful. They quoted me exactly right. Well done, Jim Quello, and Godspeed.
And Commissioner, just for the record, it's Michigan State Spartans. Trojans was at a different time in his life. So there you go. That would be a Quelloism, would it not? You learn from the master. Now I'd like to introduce a very good friend of Jim Quello's, former chairman Michael Powell, and TV spokesman.
Well, I'm going to be brief, but I haven't got to sit here in a long time. I would like to ask the Secretary to present the first item. it is really, I have not been in this room in 6 years. And when I return to it, I'm reminded that what is so special about this agency and the orbit that surrounds it is a family who, at the end of the day, is deeply committed to each other and the legacy of an agency. And to some degree, that cultural attribute of our community was stewarded with great care by this great man. No one was permitted in this fraternity not committed to those principles. And I'm very, very proud of this agency. And recently, certainly we've had a lot of talk in the context of the National Broadband Report about the extraordinary technical achievements of electronic communication. We sing evangelically about the virtues of broadband and all other forms of electronic communication, but I'm reminded here today that long before any of that was invented or any of that was possible, the humankind communicated through story. And it was story by which we shared experiences and brought history and tradition forward. And there was no more masterful storyteller than the amazing Jim Quello. Jim would regale you, whether you wanted or not, for hours on end. It mattered not whether you had heard this story 5, 7, 9 times. Each time that story was told with as much vigor and as much optimism and enthusiasm as the first time. And I remember as time went on, and I heard about the 4th amphibious landing for the 50th time, I would notice that younger generations, or those who had not known him so long, when cornered with him, you could see the fatigue in their face and the wariness and the effort to get away. And I thought, wow, this digital generation may not truly appreciate what they're hearing. Because Jim's stories were more than stories. They were parables of wisdom. Hiding in every one of them was a lesson for you if you were attuned enough to listen and take it. I mean, we talk about him and his 4th amphibious landings, and I'm here to tell you as a former soldier, that's extraordinary. No one lived through that. And in the telling of that story was a story of what it means to be courageous and what it means to be steeled, what it means to be principled and committed to something bigger than yourself. And the more you heard it, if you took comfort in it, the more you would gain strength from that story. I don't know how many times I've heard Jim complain or celebrate how much money he left on the table, leaving ABC Broadcasting some god-awful million years ago. He might be losing it now if he still had it, but he never failed to tell this story, and I always giggled because it was a great story, but he always seemed to be smiling. And it really took me for a while before I realized Jim was teaching us about the value of public service. That some things are better than money. Some things are more important and significant. And for those who choose to dedicate a portion of their lives in the service of the public good, that is a worthy calling that you can be proud of no matter what you left on the table. Wisdom littered everything he said. The only thing I didn't listen to was design advice. I will never know how anyone puts this color with that color in an office and gets away with it, but he did. Jim as we've heard, was an interim chairman, but I think his greatest attribute is he was chairman to the chairman. There's not one of us, not me or any other colleague, who has never begun their career by first going on pilgrimage to pay homage to the great one and to hear about what it was going to be before you and to be taught what that was about. So, boy, we will miss him. But he's not gone. In those stories that we will tell over and over again is not only his memory, but his example and his words of wisdom that should and do guide all of us forever, get to live on. And that's the legacy of a life. And he did it with grace, courage, and optimism that so many more people in this town could emulate and would be all better off. I am grateful for having known him, and I'm grateful that he introduced me to so many of you. Thank you for letting me speak today.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear all of these comments from Jim's colleagues and those that followed him as chairman, as commissioner at the FCC. I know I'll just pass on one thing. Commissioner Clyburn provided a note to Jim on that Friday night, the very night that Commissioner Cobbs was there, before his passing, and Jim always was concerned about the commission. And it was a beautiful, beautiful note, and I'll leave that to Jim's family and to the commissioner. But what was typical of Jim was he says, that's a great note. We need to make photocopies of it. We had to make photocopies right away. He says, there are people in the firm that need to see this. And at another time that same week, we were talking, and he says, how's the morale at the agency? How's it doing? Are people happy there? Michael Copps, he did a good job. He did a good job opening this place up again. He was always concerned about everyone here at the commission and to make sure that they enjoyed working for an agency that he loves so dearly. So now we're going to go into a little slideshow or a little video, and I want to thank those who worked in this video. And this has been a video prepared for the Quello family, and it's being shared with us today. So I want to just start that and let you enjoy it.
I regret that I'm not able to be with you to celebrate the life of my good friend, Commissioner Jim Quello. Please know, however, that I send you my warm greetings on this most auspicious occasion. Commissioner Quello was an important part of my life. He will be remembered for his 23 years of outstanding service and contributions to the Federal Communications Commission. His leadership, diligent efforts, and commitment to his profession added a measure of integrity to the Commission. Commissioner Quello dutifully served his country in World War II with great honor and heroism. His life demonstrated the greatness of the American spirit, and he will forever serve as an inspiration to us all. I'll miss his friendship and will never forget him. He will be missed by all who knew and loved him. Aloha.
Jim Quello was my friend. I first knew him when he was at WJR Radio in Detroit. He sold his stock in Capital Cities Broadcasting and ABC at a huge loss so that he could serve his country, first as member and then as chairman of the FCC for more than 20 years. But Jim Quello knew more about sacrifice and duty. He was a decorated veteran of World War II, and he had a spectacular record. He went on to become one of the most able and respected experts on telecommunications in the country. People who went before the FCC will tell you he was honorable, decent, and extraordinarily talented. He was a native of Michigan, an accomplished scholar, a hero, and a leader. He made our state proud. We've lost perhaps the best chair that the FCC has ever had, and you and I have lost a dear friend.
In 1993, right after Jimmy became the chairman of the FCC, he and I had lunch at the Palm in his favorite booth. It was like having lunch with Ted Williams at Fenway Park. From the maitre d' to the waiters to every person in that restaurant, it was Jimmy Quello sitting over there. He owned the place. And for me, it's one of the most memorable lunches I'll ever have. Whenever we talked in my office with Jimmy, affable, straightforward, never any question where he was coming from and what he was trying to achieve. One of a kind. Jimmy Quello, all those meetings I will never forget because he was somebody who was the embodiment of the Federal Communications Commission.
The story of the boss, Chairman Jim Quello, began on April 21, 1914 in the prosperous mining town of Laurium, Michigan. He was the son of Italian immigrants, the baby of the family, and by all accounts his mother's favorite. This is Chairman Quello, age 5. This photograph was taken shortly before he was expelled from kindergarten for beating up all the kids who made fun of the way he looked. Looking like this, he must have beaten up a lot of kids. When he was in the 3rd grade, his family moved to a suburb of Detroit. At that time, Detroit was basically controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. In addition to hating African Americans, The Klan also hated Jews and Catholics, especially Catholics whose names ended in vowels. Jim Quello survived by making a mutual defense pact with two Jewish boys. "If you want a lesson in tolerance," he was later to say, "you should experience what I did." It was a lesson he took with him through the rest of his long life. Jim Quello went to Michigan State hoping that someday he could edit the school paper and manage the college radio station. He did both, and he found his passion, journalism. He also found another kind of passion. Mary Butler was Miss Michigan State when she met Jim Quello. Mary and Jim met at a college dance. They fell in love and never looked back. 5 months after they met, they were married. She was the love of his life, his true partner in everything he did. Their marriage lasted 63 years until her death in 1999. Jim Quello's decision to join the ROTC for the uniform money brought with it consequences he'd never envisioned. As the United States began gearing up for the war in the late 1930s, Lieutenant in the Reserves Jim Quello was called up for active duty. Jim Quello went into the war a second lieutenant. 33 months later, the young man who wasn't interested in a military career came home a lieutenant colonel and a decorated battalion commander, winning the Bronze Star. He served under General Patton in Africa and Sicily, and the famously tough Patton was later to call Quello's 45th Infantry Division the best infantry division in the history of American arms. He cheated death a number of times. He took part in 6 amphibious landings, and his battalion stormed and took the SS War College in Munich. He also witnessed the liberation of the infamous Dachau concentration camp before the Army put it off limits to all personnel. Knowing that the Americans were about to overwhelm them, the Nazis abandoned Dachau without trying to cover up the horrors it held. Years later, Jim Quello would still struggle when asked to describe what he saw. When he could, he would say simply that it was beyond description, the embodiment of the Nazi evil we were fighting to vanquish.
Probably one of the most moving tales that he ever told me, one of the most important conversations we ever had, was when he told me about how he led American troops in to liberate Dachau, and what it was like to see the Holocaust face to face, and what it meant to him. And I thought to myself, this is somebody who has been part of the greatest generation. This is somebody who saved the world for democracy.
Reunited after 33 months overseas, Jim and Mary Quello went on a second honeymoon in New York. By chance, they struck up an acquaintance with a man who offered to buy the young officer and his wife drinks at the Stork Club and dinner at 21. By the time the evening was over, he was so impressed by Lieutenant Colonel Quello that he offered Quello an entry-level public relations job at radio station WXYZ in Detroit. He took the job and did publicity for the Lone Ranger and Green Hornet radio shows before moving on to the biggest radio station in the market, WJR. He would become vice president and general manager of WJR. Described as a cross between Damon Runyon and The Godfather, Jim Quello earned a national reputation for his management skills and his ability to relate to people. He was elected president of the Michigan Association of Broadcasters and was active in the local community, serving on the Detroit Housing and Urban Renewal Commission as commissioner and chairman for 21 years.
As a newly minted FCC chairman, I first met Jim Quello back in 1974 at the Michigan Association of Broadcasters. He told me then that he was going to try to be an FCC commissioner, and I said, will it be as a Democrat or a Republican? And he replied, does it matter? And right then, I knew we were going to get along very well.
The career that would make Jim Quello the boss began when President Nixon nominated him to the FCC in 1974. So outrageous did it seem to have a broadcaster on the commission that 80 organizations, and even Broadcasting Magazine, publicly opposed his nomination. The chairman of the Confirmation Committee thought it would be a lot simpler to put Quello on the CAB instead of the FCC. Quello's confirmation hearing lasted 8 days, the longest on record for any Democratic regulatory agency nominee. After he was done testifying, however, he had so won over the chairman and the members of the committee that they approved his nomination unanimously. He was confirmed by the Senate and launched into what he would later call the most fascinating and productive experience of my professional career. Before his last confirmation hearing in 1992, Senator Inouye proposed to give Jim Quello a 15-minute confirmation hearing. The senator was as good as his word. It lasted only 12 and a half minutes, the shortest confirmation hearing on record. During his 23 and a half years on the commission, Jim Quello was pragmatic and independent. During his tenure, he helped the communications industry transition from rotary phones, Ma Bell, and 3 analog television networks to a world of advanced digital services, cable and satellite television, and mobile communications devices. Just as important as his contributions to commission policy was the way he went about his job. Jim Quello was the embodiment of collegiality, civility, and good humor. He earned the respect and admiration of his colleagues on the commission and the people he dealt with both inside the commission and outside.
Jim was a moderate Democrat. I was a moderate Republican. We found common ground in that we were looking for pragmatic regulations that were not over-regulatory. He held court over the FCC using his affable personality and his sense of humor. I threw aloha parties to break the ice and make sure that everybody worked well together. But what really struck me about Jim was his kindness. Immediately after we met, he took me under his wing, the young commissioner, and he gave me lots of advice about how to be a good commissioner. So he advocated things like, have an open office. Make sure you see everybody before you make a decision. He advocated transparency at the commission.
I can recall those wonderful back and forths, and I can recall that Jim was in some ways an anti-Washington character. He was full of life, full of candor. He was not calculating. Jim was always forthcoming and always straightforward. And I remember always such enthusiasm the times that Marty and I spent with Jim and Mary and their wonderful friends and our wonderful friendship with them and the time playing tennis.
The boss treated everyone on the FCC staff with respect. It didn't matter whether you were a GS2 or an SES bureau chief. He treated you with courtesy, and he valued your contribution and your hard work. He was never known to make a disparaging remark about any staff member, regardless of how much he might have disagreed on an issue. To him, everyone was doing their level best, working together to achieve something that would make life better for the public, and that was what mattered. He also had a wicked sense of humor and never took himself too seriously.
I met Jim at his favorite restaurant, The Palm. He immediately took me over to the wall to show me his caricature. And he said to me, "Chong, I can help you get up on the wall. They need more women and minorities up there." It was his own designated entity program for The Palm.
I think of all of his many qualities that I'll remember always is his great sense of humor. Who among us doesn't have some favorite Quello humorism that sticks with us? My favorite is that when we were at 1919 M Street on the 8th floor, the commissioners had their own bathroom. And I met Jim going in there one time, and I held the door for him, and Jim said to me, "You know, Henry, this is the only place that people on the outside think we know what we're doing." So that's my favorite Jim Quello story.
Jim and Mary were unbelievably gracious, unbelievably welcoming. I needed a lot of welcoming because I didn't actually really know much of anything about the FCC. Those who remember the era will say, boy, and how. And Jim provided me a tremendous amount of guidance and counsel from the very first second and for the entire time that we served together. Very early on, he said to me, "I'm going to take you to the Palm restaurant. That's where you're going to meet everybody." So I went over to the Palm with Jim, and we sat down, and he said, "I've really got some important advice to give you." And I gathered myself and listened very carefully, and he said, "Kid, don't order the special."
After almost 23 years and having served under 5 chairmen, you would think that Jim Quello had written his chapter in FCC history. But in a way, the best was yet to come. President Clinton appointed Jim Quello chairman in 1992. As chairman, Jim Quello brought a new spirit of goodwill to the job and a collegial good humor to his relations with his fellow commissioners. During his tenure, the commission implemented the complex provisions of the 1992 Cable Act, secured spectrum auction authority from Congress and proposed rules to implement it, and established rules for the new mobile PCS service. He was called the Report and Order Chairman, and, although he held the job for less than a year, it was said that he accomplished as much as some chairmen do in their entire terms. He retired from the commission in 1997. A farewell dinner given in his honor by Chairman Hunt started with a guest list of 300, but ultimately grew to over 1,100. After retiring, the boss continued to receive what he happily called his pre-posthumous awards, becoming, in his own words, the oldest and most awarded SOB that ever graduated from the FCC. Among all his achievements, he considered the establishment of the James H. and Mary B. Quello Center for Telecommunications Management and Law at his alma mater, Michigan State, the capstone of his long and distinguished career. The boss also kept in constant touch with the issues and the people at the commission. In fact, the day before he died, he asked one of his visitors how the chairman and the staff were doing. In his years as commissioner and chairman, Jim Quello made us feel like we all played for the home team, his team, and we did. That's why everyone who worked at the FCC while he was here is entitled to call him the boss. In the end, you can understand why Jim Quello is so loved and respected just by looking at his official photograph as chairman. Alone among all the able chairmen the commission has had in its 76-year history, Jim Quello is the only one who poses smiling next to the seal of the commission he loved.
My FCC years were full of laughter and hard work that we shared, and I was so pleased during that era to have been a friend and a colleague of Jim Quello. I know right now he's up in heaven playing tennis with his beloved Mary and raising hell. I'm so glad that you lived long and you prospered, Jim. Thank you for making me a part of this.
In truth, Jim Quello was an original, a one-of-a-kind, and an outstanding member of Tom Brokaw's greatest generation of Americans. And it was my privilege to know and work with him over 35 years.
I can hear Jim Quello's voice. I can hear his laugh ringing through the office. As he laughed, he would, between guffaws, repeat the punchline over and over. Whether it was a media mogul or a law school intern, Jim would consider anyone's perspective. He loved being a public servant and recognized with all humility how good he was at it. He lived to 95. It wasn't so much the journey that mattered. No, it was the people he met, charmed, and loved along the way.
all the people that put that videotape together deserve a great deal of credit, so thank you very much. And this videotape, Dick, goes to you and your family. So please, let's make sure that you pick this up. Just in closing, I just wanted to share with you a couple of the other things. And many of you may want to know where that aqua and purple and green, as you've seen on these tables today, came from in Jim's office. Well, way back when, commissioners were given an allowance to decorate their offices. And Mary Quello was the one who decorated Jim's office. And Mary had a flair for fashion, if you knew Mary, to put that mildly. So anyway, the carpet came in first, and then all of the furniture arrived. And there was a secretary back then, they were secretaries, that was there, and when the furniture was delivered, the secretary said, you must have the wrong office, the wrong room, and had it stored in another room at the commission. In the meantime, the people who were preparing the furniture said the furniture had been delivered, so come in and check and see if it's everything meets your specifications. Mary arrives, there's no furniture. Asked the secretary, I got a call, said the furniture was here. The secretary said, yes, but it is just unbelievably, you're not going to like it. He says, well, where is it? Let me go check it out. Sure enough, it was exactly the furniture that Mary ordered. You know, in the Maya Angelou, how you feel when you knew people, that really matters. And for all of us that have known Jim, I'd like for his staff over the years, if you could just raise your hand, just stand out in the front for a second. These are all, you know, you look around and we've interfaced with all of these people since our time in Commissioner Quello's office, and they're all remarkable people and doing remarkable things with their lives. And a lot of that is the teachings that Jim taught us. One of the lessons that he taught me right up front was never hold a grudge. And then he proceeded to tell me about his 8-day confirmation hearing. That I thought, okay, I won't hold the grudge, but I don't have an 8-day confirmation hearing. And we all know that Jim cherished the awards that he received. And in true fashion, Jim Quello is yet to receive another award. It's been announced that the Broadcast Foundation will present the first annual Lowry Mays Award for Lifetime Achievement to Jim Quello at the NAB convention coming up. So I just worry about all those who are living who are in competition with Jim. But I'm sure the boss would appreciate that award, and particularly in the honor of Lowry Mays. So I also want to thank those who are really responsible for all the hard work that went into gathering all of this. Pete Belvin, Petester, where are you? There you are. And Maureen O'Connell, Jane Mago, and then the rest of us just kind of said, okay, whatever you want. And so hats off to all of these folks for their hard work. And most importantly, I think we all would agree that as much as Jim contributed to our lives, the contributions that you made to his life were incredibly valuable right up until the very end. So remember that. Remember the lessons that he taught us, and let us all celebrate the remarkable life that Jim led. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.